army painters, collectors, kit bashers, terrain makers, and commission painters, this book is for you. And I know this. Are we recording? And I know this because I've taken the time to read this book to find out that the author himself is an army painter, commission painter, terrain maker, kit basher, and all those other things that I've mentioned previously, and many more. That's why I find this book to be extremely relatable and really digestible for someone who is like the many things I just mentioned. Dave Taylor is a very prominent figure in the miniature hobby community. A lot of people, especially in the western front of the world, know a lot about him, but I'm not so sure about my Asian folk and fellow Filipino guys out there and girls who are not familiar with this name. But he is made popular because of the front cover here, which is his own kit bashed, custom painted army from a cacophony of model kits, not just exclusive to Games Workshop. And I've come to this conclusion to telling you about this book because my experience reading this book was very, very enjoyable, thanks to how it was written and to what the topics were discussed here. As an army painter, Dave Taylor details very, very well in simplistic and relatable terms how he goes about a large project. And not just in a way that he would just storytell or record what he did, but also give you a rubric or sort of steps along the way that you can apply to your own hobby projects and how you can plan ahead and even target bigger projects in the future. Juxtaposing that hobby side of him, he always considers that there's a chunk of us that's also gamers. This means that the tips and advice that he gives is not just strictly oriented to someone who wants to get stuff painted for display, but to get stuff painted beautifully to display on the tabletop and play and brag about with their friends. He is a multi-award winner of Armies on Parade on Games Workshop, if I'm not mistaken. And before that time of Facebook and Instagram, his blogs were the proponent on how his work was featured and well known around the world of the interwebs at the time. In addition to getting a lot of tips and tricks on how to tackle big projects, you'll also get to see how each project is made unique, and not just how he selects and fits his specific armies with different kits, but how he uses different kits to make the current kits unique to himself. So he does a lot of kit bashing and sculpting, which is, in my opinion, very, very impressive for someone who is an army player. Nowadays, you always see someone who is strictly just a crafter, strictly just a painter, strictly just a gamer. This guy is a trifecta, and that's why I think a lot of people can pick up this book and find something relatable to themselves. And just because I've been mentioning Games Workshop a lot, he actually features a lot of non-Games Workshop games in this book. So you'd be surprised to know how many other beautiful miniatures and armies exist in the ethosphere outside of our Warhammer bubble besides just historicals. There are other sci-fi and other fantasy armies out there that are not Games Workshop published. And of course, as a wargamer, you'll get to see how he went about his terrain collection, both from building from his own kits up to MDF terrains, and even storing and collecting and planning projects for specific terrains that match battlefields and even armies that he has. At this point, you could already tell it's just well loaded and chock full of things for someone who is just a painter, maybe also a gamer, and maybe also a crafter at the same time. And this is a considerably meaty book. This can't just be the only stuff inside of it. A lot of sprinklings of unique stories as a hobbyist is also fitted in between these pages, in between the chapters. And he uses those stories to teach you the lessons and tips and tricks he wants to portray. Just how like we watch stuff on YouTube. It makes it a little bit more easier to consume, and it also makes you feel like as you're reading the book, you're also talking to a fellow hobbyist in one of your friendly local game stores. It's a very easy read, and it's chock full of notable names, not just by Dave Taylor himself, but you have people from Guerilla Miniatures talking about... Actually, this... We have a lot of notable names who've also contributed to writing specific parts of this book, such as Ash Baker, who has a very, very cool YouTube channel. And you get to see how many miniatures and war games that he actually has on his own collection. And he'll detail how he goes about planning, painting, those armies. People like Joel Moon and Mel Bose, those people are very prominent in the hobby as well and have contributed significant articles here that you might find interesting if you're into terrain collecting and painting. Lastly, why I think you should get this book or have this book in your collection or library or what have you is because it's a book that I personally look forward to going back to. Maybe not reading it front cover to cover, but going back to the little footnotes of inspiration and parts that I want to use for my personal hobby experience. The only negative, actually, to be honest, I can think of is the photos are not as high definition as I would like. They do take up a lot of space, which is very, very great. That you have a lot of centerfold photos which are stunning and amazing to look at, and as much as I want to get lost into the photos, they are quite low resolution. I know this is a Kickstarter publication and maybe he may not have had a lot of support at the time in terms of photography, but it's still an excellent worth it buy you could get on Warlord Games. Link is in the description. And one of my notable favorites is the foreword by our very loved Dan Abnett, Black Library author, where he credits Dave Taylor's miniatures very, very well. And I think what made the relationship stronger, or what really tied these two people together, Dave and Dan, is the fact that Dave has created his own Tanith army and Gaunt's Ghosts before the model kits even came out. As Dan wrote about it in his novels, it inspired another hobbyist to create a full-on army just based out of the lore. And that's one of the things that I love about how he writes his stories here, where he takes the lore from specific franchises and turns them into actual tabletop usable games. This was at a time where Games Workshop and the internet was not really massive on YouTube. Tutorials were done live or on online forums or reading magazines. You really build a high respect for Mr. Dave Taylor here for creating such wonderful armies without the use of the tools we have today. Another favorite feature of mine is the fact that the kit bash stuff here looks really, really stunning. It's very inspiring to see an army painter paint beautifully painted miniatures at such a reasonable amount of time and still push himself to learn a new skill at sculpting and make it look amazing. A lot of the times we're daunted with just speed painting 2,000 points, but this guy eats up 2,000 points while handling a day job, I think, and learning a new skill along the way. Time management is tackled a lot here, and it's done in a very, very relatable and unique and entertaining way. When you get this book, you'll get to see what he calls the SMART goals, or the SMART goals, which will really help you guys figure out big projects, which I do plan to apply on my future projects when I start newer armies and not just Space Marine. Lastly, the favorite thing I love about this book is that it epitomizes what we could be as hobbyists. Yes, Dave Taylor is a very famous, talented guy, but he was once a hobbyist who knew nothing about miniatures. He just fell in love the same way we did, albeit he did get a lot of good networks with working with a lot of people in the community, but so could we. And he came up with a book showing his own personal collection, stunning a lot of people worldwide with this publication, me included. And it's nothing stopping me, you, or anyone else who's fallen in love with this miniature hobby to create beautifully stunning miniatures and works of art that not only we can be proud of, but actually we could show off to the rest of the world. So I'm not sponsoring this book, but instead of buying yourself a miniature and adding more to your backlog, add a book to your non-existent reading backlog. And take a break every now and then and get inspired by reading one of the stories of one of the greatest greats in our hobby community. If you like this video, I do a show called HobbyMoPro where we talk about motivation and productivity in our miniature hobby, which we all know and love. My name is Louie of Louie Loves Minis. Please subscribe. And always remember to hobby every day to keep the sprues away. You gotta check first.